We shall commence this module by discussing the role of agriculture in economic development. Poverty, hunger, or underdevelopment are state of conditions where some sections of society remain deprived from the access to basic necessities of life. Poverty and hunger remain the most pressing issue that LDCs are facing today. It is because of this fact that a large section of the population in most of the developing countries are not able to satisfy the basic needs of the life like food, but to think about other objectives like raising the levels of living and expanding the range of economic and social choices. The proportion of poor is much higher in rural areas in comparison to urban areas. In rural areas, agriculture is the primary source of employment and income for a majority of the population therein. Since agriculture is the most important source of employment and income generation, it is natural to expect that performance of agriculture will have impact on rural poverty. This is also true in case of India. Schulz remarks perceptively, most people in the world are poor, so if we knew the economics of being poor, we would know how much of the economics that really matters. Most of the world's poor people earn their living from agriculture. As if we knew economics of agriculture, we would know much of the economics of being poor. We all know that most of the world's people are poor, that they earn a pittance for their labor, that half and more of their meager income is spent on food, that they reside predominantly in low-income countries, that most of them are learning their livelihood in agriculture. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the condition of people depending on agriculture with the case of India, understand the role of agriculture in economic development, understand agriculture and poverty reduction, know how agriculture development promotes industrial development and tribal development, understand linkages between agriculture development, inflation and food security. Now we will discuss condition of people depending on agriculture in case of India. There is declining importance of rural and agriculture sector in the policy formulation of many developing countries. The same is the case for the people, both for the farmers and agriculture laborers depending on agriculture. Everybody believes in growth, which is less likely to come from agriculture because of quick operation of law of diminishing returns. The basis of its neglect is agriculture can't help much in growing the economy, so emphasis is put on other sectors like industry and services. The basic outlines and strategy of Indian economic development planning in the post-independence era was set during the second five-year plan, popularly known as Nehru-Malanobis strategy. The current core of that plan was a move toward capital-intensive, fast-paced, heavy industrialization led by the public sector. In doing so, the planners either sacrificed or postponed or paid lip service to all other ideal goals, that is the development of agriculture, the creation of employment opportunities, balanced regional development, and improvement in the well-being and quality of life of the rural people, very well stated by Brass. For example, the percentage share of agriculture gross capital formation, that is GCF, in total GCF has declined from 18.9% in 1980-81 to 9.9% in 95-96. Similarly, public investment as percentage of total investment in agriculture and the allied sectors has declined from 20.5 in 2004-05 to 17.6% in 2008-09. The persistence of poverty, hunger and underdevelopment is the neglect of the rural sector and more precisely the agriculture sector, which leads to exclusion of majority of the population depending on it. Despite such high growth rate of non-agriculture sector, people could not move out of low productive agriculture to high productive industrial or services sector. That was the basic tenet of the growth trickle-down theory adopted by the government and more precisely by the Planning Commission. Though the share of agriculture in the GDP is continuously declining, only 15.7% in 2009-10, it still provides employment to 52% of the workforce in comparison to the other two sectors. In three most populated states, namely Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and Madhya Pradesh, 48% of the rural poor are agricultural labor and 28%, in total 76%, are self-employed in agriculture. People depending on primary sector has low productivity and low income in comparison to the people depending upon other sectors. For India as a whole, during 2003, the incidence of poverty among farmer households was 30.7% compared with 24% for all rural households. There is a slow pace of reduction of poverty among agricultural wage labor and marginal farmers. Moreover, even a farmer household having a good size of land fails to meet his consumption needs from his income due to poor investment in agriculture development and slow pace of farm diversification. Increasing marginalization of land holding is one of the major issues confronting agriculture. At all India level, a farmer household has to possess more than 4.1 hectares of land to earn enough for meeting his consumption expenditure. For India as a whole, the proportion of such farmer households was only 5.2%. The rest, namely 94.8%, were running a deficit during 2003. It has resulted in serious farm distress all over the country. The intensity of the farm distress is such that the suicide mortality rate, that is SMR, which is defined as suicide deaths for 1 lakh persons, for male farmers increased from 12.3 in 1996 to 18.2 in 2005, whereas the SMR for male non-farmers increased from 11.9 to 13.4 in 2005 in the same period. Now let us discuss the role of agriculture in economic development. There are many contributions that agriculture sector could play for economic development of LDCs. Number one, agriculture provides labor to the non-agriculture sector at a comparatively lower wage rates. Based on the logic of Lewis' theory of mobilization of surplus labor from low productive agriculture sector to high productive industrial sector. Many developing countries experience the existence of surplus labor and the use of that labor at a very low social opportunity cost could be an important factor to promote economic growth. Secondly, food and raw materials are supplied by agriculture. Indeed, the cost of industrialization depends substantially upon low food and raw material prices. Since the industrial real wages would depend upon food prices, a steady food price is supposed to be imperative for achieving economic development. Further, in most developing countries, the demand for food is high and not expected to fall significantly, partly because of population explosion and partly because of subsistence farming. Thirdly, exports of agricultural products can help a country to earn valuable foreign exchange. It is better for the developing countries to diversify the primary export basket to avoid inelastic demand, since many are specialized in the export of primary goods. Fourthly, the rate of capital formation in developing countries can be considerably improved by the agriculture sector based on the theory of Lewis, Renaissance and Jorgensen models of economic development. It is enough to recall that the process of accumulation depends upon the elasticity of food supply, because given the bottlenecks in the supply side, wages and cost will rise. Profit margins are supposed to fall, leading to an overall decline in surplus and growth. Fifth, agriculture in developing countries can play a crucial role in expanding the size of home market. This can be achieved by enlarging the money and real income of the cultivators, which will increase the demand for industrial products and thus will act as a stimulus to industrialization. The next section discusses the linkages between agriculture and economic development. Moving on to agriculture and poverty reduction. There are many facets of poverty in LDCs, and one of them is its rural nature. Question arises, why such a huge number of poor people live in rural areas? Income of individual depends on productivity of a given work. In rural areas, people mostly depend upon agriculture and allied sector activities. But the productivity of that sector is low, leading thereby low income and high poverty among the people. This is why the overall rate of growth of the economy has not been transformed into significant reduction of poverty in absolute sense. Rather, there is an increase in inequality, that is relative poverty, in recent years. The incidence of poverty is determined by two major factors, namely the average level of living in a region and the distributional parameters. According to Streeton, there are 6 conditions of development, of which 2 are worth mentioning, that is output and income and conditions of production. To him, the agricultural output and income depends upon the condition of production, and condition of production depends upon adequate infrastructure including irrigation. The low level of agricultural productivity are generally due to dwindling public financial support for infrastructure development and agricultural sector such as technology, modern inputs, credit, road connectivity, storage and market. Agriculture productivity is directly linked with the quality of public infrastructure such as irrigation. This is also the reason why the irrigated area results in higher agricultural productivity and higher income in comparison to rain-fed area. The lower productivity and higher levels of poverty is more prominent in rain-fed agricultural area. There is still the prevalence of subsistence farming and there is little impact of GR technology in those areas. It depends mainly on rain or monsoons for agricultural protection. In such a situation, it becomes difficult for farmers, particularly small farmers and landless laborers, to escape poverty. History shows agricultural development has played a crucial role in the development of the present developed countries like UK, USSR or Japan. Agriculture provided the necessary capital required for the development of the industry. In Japan, it was a land tax. In USSR, it was the forced extraction of agricultural surplus, and in Western Europe, particularly in England, it was the surplus generated on the land. Moreover, in case of India, it is not a coincidence that all the states having lower incidence of poverty are agriculturally developed states. States like Punjab, Haryana, Kerala, Gujarat, Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, they are either developed with agriculture or with labor-intensive small-scale industries, with cotton being the main raw material for those industries, or with both. But certainly not with the heavy industries. Agriculture development, primarily promoted by irrigation facility, has so many merits. Firstly, in the double crops or triple crops area, it certainly enhances the resource base of the owner of all groups of farmers, including the small and marginal. Secondly, it assures return to the farmers, particularly in the single crop or rain-fed or drought area. Thirdly, it promotes farmers to adopt technology of production, leading thereby increase in overall productivity. Fourthly, The benefits are not only confined to the owners of land but also to the landless agricultural workers by increasing their demand and ultimately the wage rate. Advanced agriculture requires high and intensive use of laborers, which increases their bargaining strength. This is the reason why agricultural wage rates are higher in agriculturally advanced states and regions, even in the agriculturally backward regions. Lastly, the revival of agricultural production is essential not only for reviving income and employment for the farmers and laborers, but also for maintaining food security of the country and raising the real income of the people, particularly for the poor, by checking in excessive price rise. Ahluwalia in 1978 examined the Indian evidence in a fairly comprehensive manner both at the all India level and at the level of major states, and found a strong inverse relationship between agricultural per capita value added and incidence of poverty during the period of 1956 to 67 to 1973-74 at the all India level. Moreover, agriculture productivity seems to impact rural poverty by raising the real income of the landless agricultural workers in two ways: by lowering the prices of the food items and by raising their wage rate. Now let us discuss agriculture development versus poverty alleviation programs. Poverty alleviation programs are based on the logic to make a person alive from hunger, nutrition or drought-like situations. Many of the poverty alleviation programs like wage employment programs or food security programs are based on to check poverty and not to solve the problem permanently. That is the origin of it. To abolish poverty, there is a need to find out the area or the regions and sectors from which it originates. Rao in 2005 argues an intriguing aspect of India's anti-poverty strategy is that while its policies to support the poor stagnate the level of relief measures, little attention is being paid to the process generating poverty, which are operating without checks. This has serious implications for sustained agriculture growth and reduction in rural poverty. Thus, in the long run, there is urgent need to deal with its origin, and for that the three measures will go a long way. First, protection of livelihood of the poor. Second, making their livelihoods profitable. And third, creation of assets or new opportunities of livelihood. The size of poverty alleviation programs, that is PAPs, depends on the rate of economic growth. With economic growth, there is higher revenue that will be spent on the scheme to alleviate poverty. The PAPs, mostly based on the principle of charity, seldom works. Has charity ever removed poverty? It is because of this poverty still exists, despite thousands of rupees have been spent on since independence, and particularly after the famous slogan of Garibi Hatao. When this is the case, it is not wise to solely depend on poverty alleviation programs. These programs would merely save the personal from disastrous consequences like malnutrition, hunger and starvation death, but cannot significantly raise the income level of the poor. In other words, it cannot make the person raise its income, so it is better to look for other strategies to achieve the broad objective of economic and social development. The agricultural development strategy, on the other hand, works directly to reduce poverty and achieve economic development without waiting for the growth to take place. Even a smaller percentage of growth in this sector has a larger impact on poverty reduction by directly raising the income of vast majority of population, particularly poor. Explaining the economic development of South Korea, Stiglitz pointed out two factors responsible land reforms, leading thereby agriculture development and human resource development. He concluded, some countries have grown without reducing poverty, and some have been much more successful in reducing poverty at any given growth rate than others. Some policies promote growth but have little effect on poverty. Some promote growth but actually increase poverty. And some promote growth and reduce poverty at the same time. This can be achieved through protection, profitable, and creation of substantial and sustainable livelihood for a large section of people, particularly poor. The need of the hour, therefore, is to achieve rapid and sustainable agriculture development. Now we shall study how agriculture development promotes industrial development. Agriculture development generates strong backward and forward linkages. Agriculture has a carrying capacity and it cannot support automatically increasing population even if it is fully irrigated and produces highest yield per acre. Industry must grow to absorb the additional labor force. Further, it leads to high demand for the industrial goods and services and thereby creating more jobs for the economy as a whole. On the question, what limits the size of the manufacturing sector, Lewis answers productivity of farmers whose marketable surplus will exchange for manufacturers. In Indian case, the point is clearly mentioned by Burmani. Highlighting the role of rainfall on GDP, despite there is declining share of agriculture, he argues, as agricultural income rises above subsistence, we expect the demand for non-agricultural goods by those primary income sources is agriculture to rise sharply. The biggest challenge for most of the LDCs is shift of labor from low productive agriculture to high productive industrial sector for high income and equality of earnings. This is possible not with low agricultural growth or low investment on agriculture, but with the development of agriculture, because people leave agriculture not with low productivity but with high productivity of agriculture. Moving on to the discussion about the agriculture and tribal development. Tribals are the original inhabitants of any country. However, they are largely poor, vulnerable, and neglected in their own land. Tribals composed 8% of the total population in India, but majority of them are poor. It is widely believed that the tribals are poor because they do not work hard. However, this is completely wrong. Rather, they work very hard, but the area on which they work is not remunerative. They are primarily engaged in agriculture and other primary activities. They do not earn good income from it either because of low productivity or low selling price of their product. The main problems faced by tribal are land alienation due to big development projects, poor quality of land in terms of irrigation, technology, infrastructure, credit and market support. The progress of land development in tribal areas is rather slow under various wage employment programs. Thus, development of agriculture is directly and positively related to the development of the tribals. Moreover, this is activity they know it best and better specialized in it. Higher income from agriculture will gradually empower them to enter the developed industrial sector with better skill and education. Moving on to agriculture development, inflation and food security. Agricultural development keeps inflation low and check poverty and hunger. It indirectly increases the income of people by keeping price level low. It also promotes food security by enabling the poor the necessary purchasing power to access the food articles. Rapidly rising food prices poses a serious threat to food security in developing countries. International grain prices rose steadily between 2002 to mid-2007, followed by more accelerated increase in late 2007. Significant grain price hike that occurred in early 2008, resulting in sharp increases in staple food cost in many developing countries. Without an adequate collective response, the rise in global food prices could result in additional 100 million people in low-income countries falling below poverty line. Soaring prices have been a contributing factor to civil unrest in nearly 40 countries, could reverse recent progress in reducing hunger and malnutrition. Let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Most of the world's people are poor, that they earn a pittance for their labor, that half and more of their meager income is spent on food, that they reside predominantly in low-income countries, and that most of them are earning their livelihood in agriculture. The persistence of poverty, hunger and underdevelopment is the neglect of rural sector and more precisely the agricultural sector, which leads to exclusion of majority of the population depending on it. There are many contributions of agriculture sector to the economic development of LDCs. Agriculture productivity seems to impact rural poverty by raising the real income of the landless agriculture workers in two ways, by lowering the prices of the food items and by raising their wage rate. Many of the poverty alleviation programs like wage employment program or food security programs are based on to check poverty and not to solve the problem permanently. Agriculture development keeps inflation low and check poverty and hunger. It indirectly increases the income of the people by keeping prices low. It also promotes food security by enabling the poor the necessary purchasing power to access the food articles.